Good afternoon, and welcome to this month's Northern Virginia Health Policy Forum. I'm Jim Scott, President and CEO of Applied Policy, a health policy and consulting firm based in Alexandria, Virginia. Today, we welcome Chris Ritter, who's the Deputy Director of Part C and D at the Center for Medicare, where she oversees key programs including Medicare Advantage, the Part D prescription drug benefit, and enrollment and appeals policies for Parts A and B. We're also joined by Brittany LaCouture, who used to work with Chris at CMS, but now is Vice President of Health Policy at Applied Policy. Welcome, and we're excited to hear from you both today. So, Chris, let's start with you. We have a lot of younger people that want to pursue a career in health policy, and you're an excellent example of somebody who has pursued such a career. So, could you please tell us how you got to the point where you are now and a little bit about your career path and the different roles you've held?
Thanks for asking. It's not, when you look back on it, it feels like it had a purpose, but as with, I think all people as they're building their careers, that's usually not how it feels in the moment, right? I will say I ended up at CMS because I decided I was in the middle of a doctoral program that I would not enjoy being a professor full time. That's truly how I got started. And I was looking around for something to do, and I ended up at CMS, and I had done quite a bit of statistics and econometrics in my, I did ultimately finish, but certainly in my graduate work. And so I took a job with CMS, starting doing a lot of the claims modeling for the original payment systems because I'm just that old. I've been around forever, or in the late 90s. And so I started there, and I always thought I would leave CMS because I don't know why, because I was like, oh, that's not really what I'm going to do. But the sheer scope and impact of CMS and the fact that there's just always something else to do has sort of kept me on. I like to consider myself a bit of a policy junkie after all these years. And I've done a lot of different things at CMS, and a lot of that has not been, again, when you're in the middle of building a career, it's not that I had a path when I started, but I've sort of looked for things that I enjoyed and that sort of came to me rather than setting my sights on something and moving to it. And I guess I would say I've spent some early years in C&D in a research position. I spent about 18 years in the fee-for-service side doing a variety of things. I spent about 7 years in the Innovation Center where Brittany and I worked together. And then I came to C&D when and would say in the CMMI world, I started doing a boatload of the drug models just because they needed somebody to do them, I really think. And because it was of an interest to me as I had been working my way through. And I worked on the original Obama model in the first rounds of the most favored nation model and many of the other models that kind of went through over there, which is a sort of a crash course sometimes in how to set things up quickly. Each little innovation center model is sort of a little piece of CMS. It has some of everything from enrollment to appeals to provider outreach. And so it's a good way to understand large parts of the agency in a small miniature. Anyway, from that, I went on to run the negotiation program when the IRA came through and the inflation rebate programs. And then most recently, when Sherry Rice retired, I would have preferred Sherry to stay. I just want to say that in case she's out there somewhere. But in her absence, I stepped into the deputy director for Part C and D. And to be honest, I didn't have as much background in C as I do in the original Medicare program, but a lot of the jobs here, as anybody who is at this level can attest, is encouraging people to do the work and helping direct the work more than it is actually doing the work. There's a lot of budgeting and personnel involved, and so that comes with any leadership position. So that is my sort of circuitous route through. But I will say there is nothing I haven't been able to leave CMS because the sheer scope and impact of the program is so great. And one of the great things is to be able to work with external stakeholders, which we really do enjoy doing.
Thanks, Chris. And Brittany, can you introduce yourself and share a little bit about how you worked with Chris while you were at CMS?
Sure. As Jim said, I am currently the Vice President for Health Policy here at AP. Um, I am a lawyer by training. Chris, I love the phrase policy junkie. I'm going to steal that. Um, but that I think also describes me. After law school, I worked at a few policy shops, think tanks before joining CMS about 10 years ago. I worked at CMMI for about 7 years as well. I think we were pretty parallel. Worked on lots of different models, including the original Most Favored Nation drug model with Chris. That was my one detail that I was put on while at CMMI, and it was amazing. And then after CMMI, I moved over to CM, where I was a technical advisor on Medicare Advantage policy in the Part C world. So yeah, that's me, and now I'm at Applied Policy.
So thanks, Brittany. So one of the things we want the audience to take away from our conversation today is really an understanding of how broad the scope of the Center for Medicare is and what its responsibilities are. So Chris, can you give us a brief overview of how the Center for Medicare is structured at CMS?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Center for Medicare is about, I guess, fully staffed, sort of depending on where we are in fluctuations, is somewhere between 900 to 1,000 people. And that's not including the contractors or anything else that kind of goes into it. It has two main sides to it that have largely grown up independently, the A and B side, which is the original Medicare side, and then the Part C and Part D side, or the managed benefit side. And they are, in a way, very similar, and in other ways, very different. If you think of the original Medicare side as the health plan, right, the original Medicare health plan, it does a lot of the parts of establishing the health plan that you would expect from any health plan, right? Setting the rates, determining how things are going to be paid and established. It's by and large payment policy, benefit determinations, and it covers the gamut in that area of all of the entire scope of A and B, whether it's institutional on the A side or outpatient on the B side, and all the parts, FQHCs, labs, ambulance, ESRD, SNF, whatever, as you run the gamut. What it is not, if you think about it, the way the agency came into being, there are other parts of Medicare that complement the payment policy that happens on the A and B side. For example, the coverage team sits in our Center for Clinical Standards and Quality. Our program integrity team sits in our Center for Program Integrity. So what's on in the Center for Medicare originally was all of the payment policy, the benefit category determinations, a lot of the rulemaking, and all of the, where I started, the econometric rate setting and simulations that sort of happen as a large part, but not the entire part of a health plan. And part regulatory agency, but again, like program integrity and things happen elsewhere, but certainly setting the regulations happen there. And then the C&D side obviously is an entirely different focus. It's the market itself, right? It's not the health plan. So it's how you're managing the market of the Medicare Advantage plans. And on the C&D side is literally everything that goes into that. So it's all policy and all operations in one place, with the exception of some of the RADV program integrity work that happens in our Center for Program Integrity. So it's kind of like all payment policy, original Medicare, all operations and policy that happen for C&D that kind of come together into one center. And we have been working, I will say this, we've been working, oh, the other thing we have, I should say, is enrollment and appeals policy. And that may come into play as we talk through today. But one thing that has been requested of us from this administration is to really dig in and do more integration in the front office and more integration between the teams, not necessarily structurally, but in terms of really working to think through the interstices of where A and B, particularly ACO program, comes up against C and D, the MA program, and to kind of more holistically look at our hiring, our staffing, and some of those things. So that has definitely been a request to us from Chris Klomp, who is the director for Medicare, but of course right now acting as the I don't know what his actual title is, but right underneath Kennedy. I'd have to look it up. Don't tell him I said that.
Thank you. So within that broad scope of the Center for Medicare, can you talk about some of the programs that you're personally most involved with in your role?
Yeah, sure. So mostly I'm managing, I would say I'm taking a broad role in managing a lot of this is less interesting to this group, a lot of the personnel pieces that come across, because I've been the permanent deputy over here. For those who haven't seen, the AB deputy director was recently announced, and that was Ryan Howe, who has been in the program for a long time and actually worked for me, but that's not such a big thing. I've been here so long, a lot of people have worked for me over the years. But Ryan has just been announced in the AV director. But in that interim space, I was actually spending quite a bit of time sort of working across all the areas. For me, though, on the wearing the C&D hat, what I really have is all of Part D, all of Part C, and all enrollment and appeals policies. That includes a vast majority of the audit and oversight functions, the compliance functions, through C&D, in addition to setting the policy, and obviously the new IRA work. And most recently, the Consolidated Appropriations Acts of 2026 gave us PBM reform. And so that is a huge undertaking that we are working on right now. And yesterday, I'll just make a plug. Yesterday, we released an RFI for Section 6224, which is the one is reasonable of the two that we're working on under the Consolidated Appropriations Act. One is PBM reform. That RFI is specifically around terms such as affiliate, bona fide service fees, some of the key financial metrics that have to be looked at for the PBMs. And then the team's also working on the other 6223, which is reasonable and relevant contract terms. So that's me. I'm sure there's more in there. I will be honest with you guys, I've been in this role for a year, and there are certain nuances to the C&D program I still am learning about. I'll just ante up right now.
I think that's all important context, because a lot of times, why doesn't Chris have time to get on a call, or why is it hard to get in touch? Like, people forget how many responsibilities for all of everything Medicare Advantage, everything, not just the drug price negotiation, but everything that happens with coverage and payment for drugs under Medicare Part D, all the formulary review, all of that. And so we're just a little blip when we have a specific question or issue we're trying to work on. So it's super helpful to have the context. So we've also seen
that's true, but I just want to say this, which I've said before. That is true. Obviously, there is a huge scope, and it is sometimes difficult to get everyone together. But it is also important that I feel like it's also important that stakeholders feel like they have access. It may not be to me. I mean, in some respects, I'm sort of the least relevant person as some of this stuff gets going, because the teams are the ones working directly on the policy. But we do try very hard within the scope of what we can do to make sure that we are available. It is really important for people to understand that there's a lot of staff that work here, and to your point, Jim, the scoping is tremendous, but it's also true that, the agency does need to be responsive, and we don't want to be like just, the opaque building of CMS. It's actually a building of people that are trying very hard to pull stuff together. And if there's a real need to meet with a stakeholder, or a stakeholder really has something that they need to come in with, I think we really want to be available. One thing I will say, when people do come in to talk to us, it is so helpful for folks to come in with not just here's my problem, but here's the analysis I've done for my problem, and here's kind of the solutioning I've been thinking through in my problem. And even if it's not a solution we could necessarily implement immediately, like that is so super helpful to come in and provide us that context. And definitely more productive for us to have all the pieces in one meeting than necessarily like, obviously, if you have a problem, you need to tell us you have a problem. But from a meeting perspective, I would say we really welcome, we are only whatever we are. We don't have all the answers. I think it's important for folks to bring us what they see as the answers from where they sit, wherever they are, sort of in the healthcare milieu. Anyway, my plug, my 2 cents.
Thank you. And then we've seen in the news that CMS has had some significant organizational changes. And then also, of course, we follow the policy changes over the past year. From your vantage point overseeing Part C and D and your experience throughout CMS, can you name a couple of the changes that you feel like had the most meaningful effect?
Yeah, from the C&D side, for sure, a big one, which I believe Inma Hernandez Delso came to talk to you guys already, has
He
been,
did.
yeah, the focus, certainly the initiative out of the Office of the Administrator on MFM pricing, which I will be clear, those negotiations were not sort of part and parcel of the C&D side, simply because this team was implementing the standard program negotiation, and it was important to keep those separate. But the movement to do the GLP-1s and the bridge model, which will be starting, oh my goodness, knock on wood, 2 weeks, although I'm feeling very good, is being run out of CM. It's a 402 demonstration. It's not a CMMI model, so that is happening out of our team, our group that handles payment policy. And so that has been a huge initiative and a really exciting model test to see how the financing could happen for GLP-1. So we are super excited about that. That's work that's been happening. Another big initiative has been the prior authorization pledge. That is, to be clear, those pledges in that initiative has been a cross-agency focus, and it's tied in with the health tech ecosystem focus. For the C and D side in particular, focusing on the electronic prior authorization, working with our partners in the health tech space to kind of push that forward, that has been a really important part. I just want to be clear, like we are just one part of a much broader initiative, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. And then I think another really important thing that we've kind of been focused on has been in our Part D space, really working to make sure that we're stabilizing premiums. We've had a demonstration the last couple of years in order to sort of address some of the fluctuations that have been in from IRA and make sure we're being focused on beneficiaries. Another really keen thing that Chris Klomp did when he came in is he took the initiative to engage in negotiations, which has always been allowed under the Part D program, but varying administrations have or haven't undertaken that. Chris Klomp really dug in with his team and engaged in those negotiations for the first time at the level that was happening. And we ended up rejecting some standalone PDP bids that sort of failed to address our concerns. And some folks came back in with revised premiums. So that sort of negotiation in the Part D space to do what we can to keep the premiums down was another, I would say, big initiative that sort of happened in the C&D space.
Thank you. So let's change and get into the substance, and then let's involve Brittany some. And so that with the Inflation Reduction Act, also mainly focused on Medicare drug price negotiation. Brittany, can you tell us about some of the recent activities at CMS, and then we'll turn it back to Chris to for the CMS take on the reasons behind some of those.
Mm,
Can you give us an
really?
overview of the rule released on Friday?
And, oh, go ahead, Brittany. Do you want me
No,
to?
you can go ahead, Chris.
Okay, what I would say at the highest level is the purpose of that rule is to codify, by and large. There are some new proposals in it, don't get me wrong, but its purpose was largely to codify the guidance that had been in place under the negotiation program. We were given statutory authority to use program guidance for the first several years of the program through 2028. And in fact, I assume you're talking about the drug price negotiation, right, rule that came out. Yeah. So the vast majority of it, I was just making sure, the vast majority of it is codifying that which already exists in guidance and which is already running the program. So most of what's in there, I will just say, should not be new or look new to the majority of people that are looking at it, but we had to go through the exercise to put it into regulation rather than keeping it in guidance. An interesting part of this was our interpretation of the guidance was that anything that was happening using a program guidance, anything that was happening in 26, 27, 28 actually had to happen under guidance. So we still have an obligation to do guidance if we need to for 28 for operations, and everything in 29 is for IPay 2029 or codifying that which already exists. I would say the most prominent new proposal that's in there is to handle fixed combination. There is a proposal for fixed combination products that if that impacts any of your members or participants here, they should take a look at. It's really trying to address the issue of when ingredients are added for delivery. The hyaluronins are given as an example there that aren't really focusing on the indications of the primary ingredient. And so there's some proposals around how we consider the active ingredient or the active moiety there for purposes of drug selection. So I would say there's also some things that we implement in terms of I think it's a temporary floor, a couple other things that are by statute, but I would say that's the biggest proposal. If folks are looking to look for whatever's new, sort of in the rule.
Thanks, Chris. And so this is the first year in practice that CMS is going to actually implement the maximum fair price and have to help with the billing for the rebates. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that goes into that and how CMS is operationalizing that?
So I would make a distinction just between the maximum fair price is the negotiation program. And you're right, 2026 is the first year that those become effective. We have put in place by law, it is the manufacturer, not CMS, that is responsible for implementing the maximum fair price, which has been an ongoing conversation with the various stakeholders, including our manufacturer colleagues, on how all of that happens. But we have implemented the MFP this year, and we've already been through the formularies, and all that is in place. And the Medicare Transaction Facilitator, which was something that we built to manage that, is in play and in place. And operating. We do continue to hear from folks on 340B implementation in certain pockets, and we have a very thorough sort of helpline process that we go through in order to take a look and address ongoing concerns from pharmacies. But I would say overall, I feel it has been a tremendous success. It has been working very well we see good statistics coming in on the timeframes and the amount of money that's moving. So that's on the MFP side. For inflation rebates, we actually started billing rebates at the end of last year, but we're now in like full swing for billing inflation rebates for the program, and it's been going very well. We've built a module and a portal for the manufacturers The one thing I would say, which I always forget, is that on the Part B side, the way the statute is written, the billing of the rebates is relentless. It is literally every quarter. And I'm sure our manufacturers wish they could escape quarterly as much as we wish we could escape quarterly. But it's the way it was written. So we are in now an ongoing billing cycle around inflation rebates. We do have an initial rebate report. There's an opportunity for manufacturers to give us suggestions of error if they see there's some concern, which, that kind of due process is typical in the CMS programs. And then again, a year later, and I think 3 years later for the Part D program, we also do a reconciliation to make sure that we are, at the end of the day, with all of the claims run out, appropriately billing manufacturers for those inflation rebates. So overall, it's been, I think we haven't had a lot of feedback. I mean, I shouldn't say this. There's always individual manufacturers that have a particular question or issue. And in many areas we've been discussing, and we will, in some cases, we've changed the rebate. We've been responsive. In other cases, we cannot. It just sort of depends on the calculation. But I feel like it's been going well, considering that's the manufacturers may not like the idea that we're charging rebates, which I probably wouldn't either if I was a manufacturer. But I think overall, I hope we've made a program that works well for feedback and for ease of getting in and being able to pay those rebates.
Great, thank you. So for 2028, that will be the first time drugs initially selected for negotiation will be eligible for renegotiation.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what your team learned through the first round of negotiations and how renegotiation could be different than the first round of negotiations?
So we've actually finalized our approach to renegotiation last year through guidance, and it very much follows the regular negotiation path. A quick note on renegotiation: CMS has put out some criteria for when we might initiate renegotiation, and that's looking at changes in indication or anticipated overall impact. And by statute, that's there. And then similarly for long monopoly drugs have to be selected for renegotiation. So this year, publicly, we've said that I think it's Tradjenta has been selected for renegotiation, and that's because it's a long monopoly drug. Like it had just been renegotiated, so. But by statute, it had to be selected as a long monopoly drug. Beyond that, I would say that the policies generally follow sort of the same course, and it's if you read, and I don't expect everyone to read through these regulations at all of them, but it is a very
That's what we do.
Yeah, that's right. You guys do. We write them, and you read through them. And then we read through what you send us, and we really do read every comment. Anyone who thinks we don't read every comment is wrong. We actually read every single comment, which takes a while. And even though we have tools now in the current day and age where we help kind of find themes, at the end of the day, we really are still reading every comment, because there's nuances that you'll lose if you don't sort of read through the comments. But in all cases, I would overall say that there's a very scripted process with very clear timeframes about when we send information to manufacturers, when they send information back. Even the number of people that attend the meetings is very scripted. And the reason for all of that was in part to be responsive to the desire for the statute was very clear, like you must have a consistent process and you must have consistent methodologies. And some of that was to make sure that like we were giving every manufacturer sort of the same due and everybody could predict and understand the process. And so the renegotiation process would just follow, for all intents and purposes, the vast majority of what goes into the negotiation process.
Thanks. And then for so the first negotiations were about sort of small molecule Part D drugs, often dispensed at pharmacies. Then now there's going to be negotiation for Part B as in boy drugs, which are, physician administered or at least usually not self-administered. And so how will the negotiation for the Part B medical benefit drugs look different than the Part D pharmacy benefit drugs?
It's interesting. I mean, I guess my short answer on that is like probably not a lot, even though your point, which is that they serve different purposes. They certainly have different pricing pressures. They have, different purchasing structures, are different, but I think the negotiation process, again, has us look at a very clear set of prices, FAMP, non-FAMP, AMP, ASP are considered as we look through, pricing. We have, and we look at all those things. We look at the clinical literature. If you look on the negotiation program website, there's we at the end of the day we put out sort of the concise, is it the explanation, sorry, comes out right before the prices when everything's done, and in it you can see a lot of the extensive clinical literature that gets reviewed for each one of the drugs. You can take a look at that. And so I would actually say our preparation processes are pretty comparable between the two. Certainly, there's an opening, there's pricing discussions that happen in a structured process, and then there's discussions with the manufacturers, and a lot of that is around the literature. So the teams would then go in and talk through the indications in the literature and how things were brought together for sure. So I expect it, oddly, to be very similar. There are some differences, obviously, in how we consider some of the pricing given how that data is reported and collected and things like that. But besides that, I actually expect it to be pretty similar. And again, a lot of the focus tends to be on therapeutic alternatives and on the clinical literature, and a lot of discussion there. And so I think all of that would continue.
Thank you. So when it gets implemented, will it use the same transaction facilitator as the Part D drugs use, or because these are buy and bill drugs, and then
Yes.
CMS is in charge of the
Yes.
reimbursement, and it's sort of a, per click kind of, physician buys it, then sends a bill. So I didn't know if the transaction facilitator would be the same, or was it some different
Yeah.
implementation?
Well, the team is working on that. Stay tuned. That's what I'm going to say on that. I think we've been giving a lot of thought to how, sort of to your point, right? So the drug negotiation itself may not be all that different, but obviously how it's purchased, how it comes to the provider, that is different, right? And so what will be the process for enabling the manufacturer to make available the MFP in the B situation the same, as they have done now in the D situation. And I would say that we have, and I think in last year's guidance, we definitely did some high level, intake and discussion, and we have been spending a lot of time talking to a variety of folks about this. And I think trying to make sure that we're able to sort of provide some of that similar supports. So I would say stay tuned for more information from us as we move forward with that. But we're in 26, so we still have time to put something out, and then time to program and test. And one thing that we did do with the original manufacturers that came through, we did a lot of testing, and we so appreciate. They may not appreciate that, but we really appreciate the original manufacturers that came through the very first part of the program, because they were really good partners in the operations and really helping us, like providing really good feedback and helping us think through the pieces. And so, we'll be looking in our pharmacies too, and we'll be looking to do the same thing as we kind of move through that process.
Thanks. And so CMS has to choose the drugs to be negotiated. Can you say a little bit about how CMS is prioritizing the next cohorts of drugs for Medicare drug price negotiation? And does that build on any experiences from the first round?
It actually might be harder for us if we actually got to choose them, But I would say with a handful of tiny exceptions where there's a modicum of discretion, and it is tiny. It is very, very prescripted as to how the drugs are selected for negotiation, which is why I would say that a good chunk of folks are typically able to predict which drugs are coming ahead of time, based on sort of rules, spend, and information that's been available. And I think we have found by and large that a lot of the researchers and others out there can really do a pretty good job about predicting which drugs are going to be selected next. And really, I have found the differences between what the outside world thinks and the inside world is just that we have the more updated like spend information because we take it like cut off the presses. But beyond that, it's actually pretty prescripted. So I would say we will choose them by executing the algorithm and identifying the top 20, I believe, heading into the next year. And what I will say is the drug selection is a very is one piece of it, but preparing to do the negotiations and really do due diligence by the public, public monies, taxpayer dollars, Part D trust fund, and preparing for those negotiations. I mean, again, I would encourage folks to take a look at those explanations. The amount of work that goes into that, when we went from 10 to 15 drugs, like the amount of preparation was so significant, and heading into 20 drugs, like it's going to be a lot of of work.
So thanks. So I expect some of the manufacturers will have had experience with negotiations, or may have had experience with negotiations, and now they're coming back and they've learned something based on their own experience. For the companies that haven't been through the negotiations, that it will be their first time, I know the specifics of the negotiation are confidential, but is there any way the new companies can benefit from some of the experience, even though it's their first time? Does CMS put out guidance, or is there a way, to know what other people did when you're going into it for your first time?
I know there are different forms of manufacturers because we've talked to a couple of them over the time. So there's definitely some discussion, obviously, among the manufacturers, and I feel like their trade association. We obviously stay in very close touch with pharma and with others, bio, et cetera, to make sure that folks are, whatever information that can be public and that we can help provide, we do provide. So I feel like those organizations do have some insight right now into how the program goes. We do a welcome letter. They may not welcome letter. We do send a welcome letter with like, here are all the things that you need to provide us, and here's how you get into these different portals, and here's what you'll need for implementation, and here's what you would prepare. So we do a lot of that. We definitely have outreach available for anybody who wants to come in. And again, I would say, looking through those explanations that we do put out at the end, which are required by statute, and while anything that is what was I going to say? Business proprietary, otherwise is redacted, and there really is a lot of information in there to kind of help people understand to the best of what we can provide, like how it will go. So I think new manufacturers coming in, we do try very hard to make sure that they are aware. And each year we have had new manufacturers coming in, even if we have some folks who have continued to be back in various forms, whether they want to be or not.
Thank you. So let's turn to prior authorization. This has been a hot button issue for both medical benefits and for prescription drug benefits. So Chris, can you talk a little bit about what is going on at CMS with the new prior authorization rules and the effort there?
I mean, the one thing that for folks who have been following along at the agency, we've done a lot of solicitation. There's been ongoing comments requests on areas to deregulate and areas to focus on, and absolutely prior authorization remains a primary sort of pain point for folks that had, and that messaging, while it was always, it's always been a known quantity, and all of us certainly understand how that works from our own experiences, but it did continue to become one of the primary areas that the public was asking the agency to look at. And I think in response to that, through that and other means, the administration really made a commitment to try and look at this. And so early on, I think it was June of 2025, there was a pledge. Many of the primary payers pledged to look at like the number of services and to adopt the electronic prior authorization, to report out on their work. And I don't have I don't know that I have the details of the pledge right in front of me. Let's see, it was, oh, maybe I do. Going to digital and standardized submission. So yeah, the e-prior auth, reducing the medical services, enhancing transparency and communication, and ensuring medical professionals review denials. Those were some of like the big things that happened. And then a lot of work began here in the agency to really address that through the Office of the Administrator, and which has been coordinating a large group of people across the agency to really take a focus on that. And so the prior auth piece, the Center for Medicare, wearing the Part C side, which is the only place we have prior auth per se. On the original Medicare side, there's prepayment review and other things that can happen. But here, wearing our policy hat, and others taking in and digging in and taking a look at it. But I will say it's been a focus for several years. So, we on the Center for Medicare side are supporting this electronic prior auth initiative, which then sort of became part of this overall sort of health tech ecosystem initiative that's underway. And so more recently, there was actually a commitment to sort of accelerate electronic prior auth pledge among the EMR vendors, among payers, among providers. That was, I think, just a month or two ago, maybe, as part of this broader health tech ecosystem. So there was sort of a second pledge that was done. It's not regulatory, but I think, people are doing it very publicly and making a commitment to sort of be in this space. And I think we're very excited about seeing how all of that plays out. And I had one of my folks pull up, as in response to the original sort of June or summer 2025 pledge. The health plans have announced that they've eliminated 11% of prior authorizations across a range of medical services. Now, that's self-reporting on their part, but I do want to say that even before all of that started, here in the Center for Medicare, we do have an initiative. It's a pilot program right now. It's been underway for some while to start collecting information from the plans. So we put an HPMS memo out maybe in February, which is reinforcing a PRA package, or a Paperwork Reduction Act package that went through, where we're collecting first line information from a handful of plans on terms of both the initial determination and the reconsiderations, which is not information that we've had in the past, like detailed information about the service, about the beneficiary. And then I think what we've said publicly is if that pilot goes well, we will expand that to all the plans in 2027. So this was an attempt at our part to also start collecting some internal information so we can have a better sense of sort of what's being handled on the initial determination and what's being handled on reconsideration in the plan, sort of before any of that comes up and out to the agency for Medicare Advantage. I will say the e-prior auth is much broader, and it's sort of an initiative writ large.
Thanks, Chris. Brittany, in April, CMS released the Interoperability Standards and Prior Authorization for Drugs proposed rule. Can you go over some of the key takeaways from that proposal?
Sure. So the new proposal follows on with an older uh, policy that was finalized, I think, a year or two ago.
Mhm.
This one is expanding to prescription drugs and calling for real-time data exchange across all of the programs. It's setting up an opportunity for more transparency around denials, requiring that an explanation is provided directly to the prescribing provider. Um, it also has an extension of the public reporting requirements, and it goes into a little bit more detail on the APIs that are available for um, uh, PDPs to use for the e-prior auth reporting.
Chris, anything to add?
I think there were Brittany, did you say this? The faster prior auth timeline is one that sticks in my head. Sort of standardizing the decision time frame. So there was expedited request within 24 hours and standard request within 72 hours for prior auth in particular, just because that's what was on my mind. And one other thing I wanted to point out, so you are 100% correct that as always, Brittany, just want to say Brittany always had all the information when I was working with her on the drug models, so she can keep me on my toes here. Is that the Part D, they proposed the interop for Part D, but I will say that Part D has sort of always had has always recognized sort of the NCPDP standards, which already has a e-prior auth standard, which was different from the medical services, which is, the one that sort of needs more kind of pulling into modern times here. But what it did do was give a time frame, adding to the required time from 27, I think, for medical and 28 for the drugs. But drugs at least already has a fair amount of penetration for e-prior auth, and some of that is just generally in the pharmacy space. I mean, ever since Part D was launched, there's been more forward motion there. There had to be in order to sort of look up a lot of the eligibility requirements and other things. So I would say that. But overall, I think you see, I don't know, Brittany, correct me, but I feel like you see this real focus from the administration on moving forward in health tech ecosystem, moving forward on interop, moving e-prior auth is sort of a pain point that is being used as like a front runner to look at all of these other pieces that are coming into play. And then maybe I'll just throw in, as an example of this, the agency has just created the Office of, I'm going to get it wrong, Healthcare, I think it's Healthcare Technology Products, OHTP, for which there was a recent release. And the purpose of that team is being led by Amy Gleason. And the purpose of that team is to really proactively and kind of comprehensively look across all the different programs and feel like, how can we bring it all together to really drive better adoption and focus across the agency's programs and for the health sector at large. And they are touching a lot of different things. I think they brought up the National Provider Directory this past fall in an attempt to sort of bring that tool into one place. And they have been looking across a lot of other things. That's one I would point out. There's also a model, the access model in CMMI, which has been very focused on looking at health tech. So I would say, taking an agency lens for sure. Dr. Oz talks all the time about really wanting to, he also has some, if you guys didn't see them, he's got some really funny little videos out there on on interop, which I'm just going to say, I think it's like kill the clipboard or something. Anyway, it is really funny. So if you get a chance to see it, you should see it. But a real focus on bringing the EMRs to the table, making sure that we are doing our best to integrate health tech. And that is absolutely a messaging that is coming to us both in the centers and I think broadly publicly from everyone. And you can see it in a lot of different initiatives that are coming forward.
I think this one will be a really interesting proposal as well. You mentioned the NCPDP and the reliance on scripts that's already been established for years. But the integration of FHIR is somewhat newer and
That's
is
true.
being used in other programs. It'll be interesting to see where the industry decides to go, if they stay where they are or move more towards FHIR.
Well, let's fingers crossed.
So you mentioned Dr. Oz. We've heard him talk a little bit about gold carding. In other words, in commercial health plans, if a physician reliably submits appropriate claims, they get a sort of level of trust where they can skip the prior auth, or their
Mhm.
requests are automatically approved, and they call that gold carding. Could you explain how Medicare Advantage is thinking about maybe gold carding?
I think Dr. Oz has offered up that concept, and no, obviously not necessarily new, as a way to streamline some of the prior authorization. I think we would hope that the Medicare Advantage plans are spending time sort of thinking about that initiative, or that idea that he's been putting out there is maybe what I'll say about it. In the same vein of sort of encouraging everyone to move forward. But I would also say that, to my way of thinking, the more we can move forward in the electronic prior auth space and make that prior authorization real time, both for the beneficiary and the provider, that has to change the dynamics sort of dramatically, right? Versus having like a long drawn out process. It creates much more transparency for the provider. Ideally, it creates more transparency for the provider and the beneficiary in that moment. And in that space, I love the idea of gold carding, but I mean, I would give a plug to, like, maybe that will transform how we think about prior auth at all. And we don't have to get into who's doing a better job or not doing a better job, because you'll have that real time work that's going on. But obviously, I think we all hope that the Medicare Advantage plans are thinking about that as well.
Right. So prior auth has sort of two sides. There's an opportunity using prior auth for healthcare providers or pharmacies to know if a product's gonna, or a service is gonna get reimbursed before they dispense it or deliver it. Especially if it's expensive, that's helpful to know it's approved before you do it. But on the other hand, there's been some accusations that prior auth is sort of overused as just a way to, not pay for services and control costs and create extra sort of red tape and burden that'll, limit access to care for patients. Has CMS thought about like where the line is between sort of good prior authorization or appropriate prior authorization and inappropriate overuse of prior authorization?
Well, I think one of the reasons we're really looking at some of the issues around the initial reconsiderations and denials, and trying to get some more information in there, which isn't directly prior auth, but certainly some of the information the plans have going, is to sort of really look at that. I think it is so, to your point, it is so hard to know in any given moment, when is the tipping point. And I think that and I feel like if you ask any individual involved in a prior authorization discussion, people would have different opinions, right, about how that comes down. So I'm not going to directly answer your question because I don't know that I know that there is an answer to that's direct. But what I do think is, the more that we can move towards transparency, the more that we have the electronic prior auth in real time, the more that we have more information, sort of that unto itself may help all of us in this conversation around, like, when is it bad prior auth and when is it good prior auth. And the truth of the matter is, like, that's a hard thing to know. And sometimes it's in the eye of the beholder and sometimes it's not. And I think one of the reasons, again, back to like our pilot collection and getting some of this data, is so that the agency can have a better sense. But even then, it's a case by case sort of assessment. And then again, I think part of what's difficult about prior auth sometimes is the waiting and the time. So back to the more that stuff can come through in real time, hopefully that will like help all of us do a better job with this process. But one thing is true, just to point out, Medicare Advantage and the programs themselves by statute are managed benefits, right? Part D and Medicare Advantage. And that allows, its purpose in life was to have those tools available. So.
Thank you. In the couple of minutes we have left, let's briefly touch on risk adjustment, which is very important to Medicare Advantage and Part D. It seems like there's a trend towards encouraging movement from the original fee-for-service program into Medicare Advantage. Can you talk a little bit about some of the recent risk adjustment developments and what they aim to do?
The primary purpose of risk adjustment is to make sure that we're, establishing as accurate a population-based payment as possible, is what I would say. And we have a team here that works really hard to assess all aspects of those models to make sure that we are really being good stewards of the program and doing our best to be as precise within the scope of a population model, a predictive and an actuarial based model is what I would say. I think we have put out a couple, guiding principles for ourselves that we put out in the 2027 rate announcement, and they were about sort of creating more simplicity to reduce day-to-day administrative burden for plans, to improve competition for all plans, irrespective of size and resource, and to focus on creating value for patients and achieving payments that reflect beneficiary health risk and facilitate the efficient use of resources. So I think all those things are true. When we updated the 2024 model, which was the data update, a lot of what went into that was really about bringing in more recent data, which really included the ICD-10 codes for the first time in bulk. And so I think like that was for sure, as well as like changing utilization and patterns. And that's probably the biggest, as the data gets updated, those are by and large the biggest changes that are sort of happening in the risk adjustment model, to the extent that we are working on updated data.
Thanks. Brittany, anything to add on risk adjustment in Part D in particular?
Well, I think it's great that you pointed out this switch to the ICD-10. That's obviously having a pretty significant effect on the total risk adjustment factor, particularly for highly complex patients. I think if you look at the totality of the programs and the policies that are coming out lately, we can kind of see a shift of, the tightening of the prior auth and the tightening of the risk corridors, and even the premium stabilization within the IRA as all of a sort of a means of making the managed care plans, MA and Part D, more sustainable in the long run. And then they have that little boost from the premium stabilization, which we know is sunsetting. But it does seem like these all together are a push towards managed care. And then also, like you said, an actuarially sound program overall.
That takes like a high level view of like where that I think there's a focus on keeping sound programs on all sides across A, B, C, and D. So I don't know that I would go as far as saying it looks like a push. What I would say is I think that there's a definite attempt in all of our programs to make sure that we're really being thoughtful about payment accuracy, and that we're being thoughtful about program sustainability on all sides, and really, as always, I would say, thinking through all of the stakeholder inputs, and as civil servants, doing our best to make sure that we're really briefing leadership on all the puts and takes that we have.
Well, thank you. Chris, at the beginning, you mentioned a little bit about effective CMS meetings, and not just coming with a problem, but also coming with a solution.
Yeah.
And we would add to that, ideally, why you think CMS has the statutory and regulatory authority to do that solution. And even better, an example of a way CMS has solved a similar problem in the past that you think is an analogy. But on the comments, you mentioned that CMS reads all the comments. So you've probably read a lot of comments. To you, what makes a good comment?
I always find in every regulation I've ever done or guidance or whatever, there's always a super thoughtful comment that really makes us think and change what we're doing. It's something we didn't see. And that to me is the whole purpose of the comment process, is to be like, okay, CMS, you did your thing, you briefed your politicals, the executive branch said this, and now it's an opportunity for the public to really weigh in and do something. And it's a little bit of democracy in its way, right? That is being built into the executive process. And we always get one or two like really, really good comments where they're like, you think it's going to do this, but it's not going to do that. And here's why. And here's the math potentially, or here's the ramifications potentially in a way that you haven't thought about. Now, that's not to say I know every trade organization and everything also has to put in what their members need to say, and those are important things to do. I would say often we know that because we work very hard to stay abreast of where all of our stakeholders are, right, when they're going through their processes. But to me, though, I will say I've never been through a process where we don't get that one comment where we go, oh yeah, that is a really good point. And really, even if at the end of the day it doesn't change what we put out, like that one comment, and people, whether if you think your comments are going into black hole, you're wrong. Like that one comment actually gets elevated all the way up through, and we will use it as an example, and we will say we heard from this individual. This is the role that they play in the healthcare milieu. This is what they're saying, and there's a lot of merit in this. Let's talk about why we want to have this conversation. It is so important. I can't give enough to say how important the comment process is. It may feel like comments go into a black hole, but we appreciate, and I mean this sincerely, every single comment that we get in is to help us think more robustly.
Well, thank you. So just to wrap up, is there one thing out of all this that you want our audience to take away from our discussion today?
The agency really prides itself, CMS really prides itself on being very thoughtful about the whole variety of stakeholders that we touch in different ways. And I think if you need to talk to us or want to talk to us, or there's something we're not seeing, then we need to know. And, that's your responsibility to help us understand what it is we don't understand, and make it a two-way conversation. And this team has my email. I can't always respond to every email, but I do try. It may come very late at night.
Thank you. And Brittany, what's your final thought?
Chris talked a little bit about how large CMS is, and CM in particular, and all of the various programs that are being run out of CM. But even with that said, and with the administration's priority that you mentioned, keeping an eye to the interconnectedness of all of the programs and how they influence each other, and they influence the final outcome and what it means for each of the individual stakeholders.
Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of this month's Northern Virginia Health Policy Forum. Thank you, Chris and Brittany, for sharing your knowledge and insights on parts C and D. And thank you to the Applied Policy team for pulling this forum together. Before I close, we just sent a message in the chat with links to subscribe to our monthly newsletter and view our website for more in-depth insights into current and perhaps future health policy. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.